Yeah, I think we've seen really truly remarkable progress in terms of the Chinese aerospace industry over the past 5 years. We've seen the flights of 7 new aircraft designs over that time, which is a considerable achievement. 2 of those have been 5th generation fighter aircraft. I think that took a lot of Western observers by surprise, and I think that in itself was further evidence that China's now capable of producing its own indigenously developed and manufactured modern combat aircraft. There's now 12 active production lines in China producing aircraft for the Chinese Armed Forces. We think there's another 8 active development programs underway at the moment, probably quite a few more that we don't know about as well. They generally appear once we get the first flight of an aircraft. We don't really know about them before then in a lot of cases. And you know, this really is a remarkable pace of progress compared to where we were 10, 20 years ago. The other thing is that we've seen a lot of progress in areas where we've previously seen weakness. China's not been able to produce wide-body transport aircraft before. Earlier on this year, we saw the first flight of the Y-20, which is a large strategic transport aircraft, 4-engine strategic transport aircraft. I think that really does show an area of progress in an area where previously there was no capability in terms of the Chinese aerospace industry. Again, with engines, which has kind of been a thorn in the side of the Chinese aerospace industry. The WS-10A, which is a turbofan jet engine for the fighter aircraft, the J-11, that's now entered production in meaningful numbers, and I think that again is progress in an area that's previously been a major area of weakness for the Chinese aerospace industry. I think in terms of the effect this has had on the Chinese armed forces, I think it's fair to say that we've seen the pace of modernization accelerate over recent years, and this has meant that we have a Chinese armed forces now that their aerospace capabilities are more advanced than they were and more modern. We believe around 150, well up to 150 aircraft may have been produced in 2012 alone for the Chinese armed forces. And this, while it doesn't mean that we're seeing an expansion in the size of the armed forces, particularly the Air Force, what we are seeing is a more modern and a more capable Air Force. The fighter fleet in particular in the Chinese Air Force has gone through a rapid pace of modernization. And what we've seen is in 2007, there were maybe 20% of all the combat aircraft in service with the Chinese Air Force were what you would consider a modern combat aircraft. We can fast forward to 2013, that percentage is somewhere closer to 55%, and that's really a lot of progress over a very short period of time. There's still areas of weakness, gaps in capability, particularly things like strategic transport, tactical lift, platforms like aerial refueling platforms, transport aircraft, surveillance aircraft. But these are all areas that we expect to see a lot of focus over the next few years, and these gaps we think will start to narrow. We've seen a lot of progress in the Chinese aerospace industry, but it's fair to say that there's still significant areas of weakness. Chinese jet engines has always been an Achilles heel in terms of the aerospace industry, and we've not really seen too many signs of progress. We know there are a lot of development programs underway, but only really the WS-10A has made it into production. And imports of Russian and Ukrainian jet engines have continued at pace. We've seen contracts for around 1,500 engines signed over the last decade alone, and we've seen no sign of the pace of those imports slowing. Again, with wide-body transport aircraft, military helicopters, particularly transport helicopters, we've seen a lot of contracts signed with Russia again, and these are really key indicators of the kind of weaknesses that there still are in the domestic aerospace capabilities. And I would think it's fair to say that at present, the domestic industry is still unable to meet all of the requirements of the Chinese armed forces. Now at present, I would say that electronics and systems within an aircraft are probably more crucial to the capability of an aircraft itself than at any time in the past. And while we have seen advances in terms of the sensors that are going into Chinese aircraft and the avionics we've seen in cockpits and things like that, it's fair to say these are the first generation of technologies we've seen in these areas. So they're unlikely to be comparable in terms of capability to Western or even Russian systems. And until we've had more time for these technologies to mature, I don't think we're really seeing the same kind of capabilities you would expect in the West. To date, I would say that the Chinese aerospace industry hasn't really made any serious inroads or sustained inroads into the global military aircraft export markets. I think exports last year we think were valued at around $500 to $600 million, which is the equivalent to around 2% of the total market. And that's not particularly significant, and we would expect that market share to grow. So I think one thing that's important here is that the Chinese aerospace industry has been completely focused up until this point, basically, upon supplying the PLA with the aircraft that it needs and meeting the requirements of the various armed services. And as a result, we've not really seen a concerted effort to push into export markets, and that's likely to be something that they try to develop as time moves on. Similarly, I think until the Chinese aerospace industry has a good grip of its own supply chain, we're unlikely to see them make a concerted effort to expand their market share. At the moment, they're still dependent for most of their exports upon the supply of Russian aircraft engines. And as a major competitor to Russia, well, major potential competitor to Russia in the military aircraft export market going forward, when the willingness of Russia to supply China with those jet engines is obviously a major obstacle to progress. So certainly I think there is a lot of potential for the Chinese aerospace industry to make a major impact upon the military aircraft export market as we go forward. There's a lot of low-cost platforms, a lot of increasingly capable platforms as well. What I would say is that it has now become more of a question of when rather than if China starts to become a major player in the export market.